There's something that can quietly grow inside your life. You won't notice it at first. It doesn't look dangerous. In fact, it can feel small, harmless, even justified. But over time, it changes everything. You've eaten it 1,000 times, torn it at tables, dipped it in oil, held it at communion. You've watched it rise in warm kitchens, but you never once stopped to ask what was happening inside it. Flour, water, time, and something unseen. Before we go to Corinth, before we read Paul's urgent letter to a church in chaos, we need to go somewhere older. Before there was wheat, before there was grain, before there was even ground to plant a seed in, we need to go to the workshop. Because according to the Apostle Paul, your story didn't begin when you believed. It didn't begin at your baptism or the moment you first prayed. It began before time, before the foundation of the world. God saw something that didn't yet exist and called it finished. Not improved, not in progress, finished. He saw you whole, complete, blameless. And that is both the most comforting and the most unsettling truth you will ever hear. Because if the end was already seen, then everything happening now is part of a process already in motion. Now we come to Corinth, a wealthy city, a powerful city, and a deeply compromised one. It sat at the crossroads of culture, philosophy, trade, and desire. And in the middle of it, a church was planted. But something had crept in, not loudly, not violently, quietly. A man in the church was living in open sin, and no one was stopping it. Worse, they were proud of their tolerance. They called it grace. Paul called it something else. He said, "You are puffed up." And then he gave a warning that has echoed for centuries. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. In other words, it doesn't stay small. What starts in one corner spreads to everything. Leaven, in the ancient world, wasn't a packet of yeast. It was something older. You would take a piece of yesterday's dough, fermented, sour, alive, and mix it into today's batch. And that piece would spread through everything, from one loaf to the next, from one day to the next. It was yesterday, invading today. And if you wanted a clean start, you didn't manage it. You removed it completely, every trace. That's why, before Passover, families searched their homes by candlelight, not casually, but carefully, looking into every corner, every crack, every hidden place, until nothing remained. Paul looks at the church and says, "Do that with your life, because what you allow to remain will not stay contained." This is where it becomes personal, because this isn't just about Corinth, it's about us. There are things in our lives that feel small, manageable, contained, a thought pattern, a habit, a quiet compromise, something we've learned to live with, but it's not sitting still, it's spreading, and at the same time, something else is happening. We're being worked, pressed, shaped, kneaded, not all at once, but over time. Because growth in the life of a believer is not instant. It's pressure, slow, steady, intentional pressure, the kind that reveals what's really there. Every hidden pocket, every place where something has been allowed to settle, it gets pressed out, and it doesn't always feel gentle, Sometimes it feels like resistance. Sometimes it feels like loss. Sometimes it feels like everything is being stripped down to something simpler, heavier, more real. And that's exactly what's happening, because the things that puff us up are not solid, they're air. And the process all of us are in is removing what isn't real, so something lasting can take its place. There's a word in Scripture that changes everything when we understand it: glory. In Hebrew, the word is kavod, and it doesn't mean brightness. It means weight, substance, density, something real, enough to endure. The world tells us that bigger is better, that rising higher means we're becoming more. But Scripture flips that completely, because the things that rise the fastest are often the most hollow, and the things that carry the most weight are the ones that have been pressed over time. Every moment of humility adds weight. Every time we choose truth over appearance adds weight. Every time something in us is stripped away and replaced with something real, we are becoming heavier with something eternal. And none of it is wasted. Not the pressure, not the process, not the pain. It's all building something we can't yet see. There comes a moment when the process changes, the shaping slows, the pressure stops, and what has been formed is placed into something new. Heat, not to destroy, but to complete, because there are things pressure can shape, but only fire can finish. This is what Scripture calls glorification, the final transformation, the moment where everything that has been worked into us all is set. Nothing hollow remains, nothing false survives. Only what is real endures, and what comes out of that process is not what went in. It is complete. So, what does this mean for us? It means what feels small isn't harmless, and what feels like pressure isn't punishment. One is spreading, and the other is shaping. And right now, both may be happening at the same time. There may be things in our lives we've allowed to remain because they seem manageable. And there may be pressure in our lives we've questioned because it felt too heavy. But neither is random. The spreading is real, and the shaping is intentional. We are not being overlooked. We are being formed. And the question is not whether something is happening. It's what we're allowing to stay and what we're willing to release. Because what we hold on to will shape us, and what we surrender will change us. This story ends the same way it began, at a table. But now, something is different. What was once unfinished is complete. What was once hollow is full. What was once being shaped now has weight. And the process that felt slow, was unseen, was never wasted. Because even when we couldn't see it, something was growing, and something else was making us ready. And the thing we couldn't see may be the very thing that changes everything. If this made you stop and think, even for a moment, then don't just move on, stay with it. Because the things we ignore are often the things that shape us the most. And if you want more like this, more stories that challenge you, slow you down, and make you look a little deeper. Then consider subscribing.